It felt like I'd been driving for ages, definitely over 2 hours, heading toward the Marriott in Baltimore. My wife, Emma, was at a conference there, and I thought it might be a nice surprise to whisk her away for dinner. But honestly, I had a much bigger reason for this trip. For the last 3 months, an unsettling feeling nagged at me, convincing me that Emma was involved with someone else. Every time she left for these work trips or training sessions, she returned later than promised. Tonight, I was determined to catch her red-handed if it came to that. I needed to silence the doubts that were gnawing at me. After 14 years of marriage and raising two incredible kids, Megan, who's 12, and Liam, who's 10, I couldn't let this eat away at me any longer. The kids were spending the night with my mom, giving me the perfect chance to confront Emma about my fears. We had tied the knot right after high school, having dated for a couple of years beforehand. Emma used to radiate positivity. Her long brown hair and stunning figure always turned heads. But something shifted a few months back. Little things began to unsettle me, creating an atmosphere of unease. I didn't want to come off as paranoid or overly jealous, so I bottled up my concerns. This conference, being so conveniently nearby, offered me a golden opportunity to drop by unannounced. Once I arrived at the hotel, I handed my suit bag to the front desk and introduced myself as Ryan Johnson. I informed the clerk that my wife, Emma, was at the insurance conference in room 214 and that she had said I could collect a key from the front desk. After verifying my identity, the clerk handed over the key, and I took a deep breath as I headed toward the elevator. My nerves were shot as I pondered what I'd do if I actually caught her in the act. Should I knock or just barge in? Would she be alone? As I walked down the hallway, I resolved to simply use the key and uncover the truth for myself. Trying to keep my footsteps quiet, I slid the key card into the door and slowly opened it. What I found took me by surprise. Emma sat at the desk with her briefcase open, poring over some paperwork. She turned around, clearly shocked to see me. I quickly explained that I had some free time and thought I'd drop in to take her to dinner. To my relief, Emma looked genuinely thrilled to see me. She suggested I stay the night and seemed excited about having my company. She walked over and planted a kiss on me, and in that moment, I realized my plan to confront her had completely backfired. But then, as I made a joking remark about wanting to spend some quality time together before dinner, she shot me a sly smile and suggested we indulge in a quick, intimate moment before she hopped in the shower. She even promised a full night of whatever I desired afterward. For a fleeting moment, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Maybe I had just been overreacting. We shared a brief but passionate encounter, and then Emma headed into the bathroom for her shower. I took a deep breath, attempting to dismiss my earlier doubts, and sat down on the bed. As I sat there, my eyes landed on Emma's toiletry bag resting on the dresser. I thought about checking it for some aspirin to alleviate the headache I had developed from the long drive. However, instead of finding pain relief, I stumbled upon something that made my heart plummet: a pack of 6 condoms. I stared at them, my mind racing. After Liam was born, Emma switched to birth control pills, which had made her feel nauseous. That's when I made the decision to have a vasectomy. Since then, we hadn't needed any form of contraception. So why on earth were there condoms in her bag? The truth crashed down on me like a freight train. She was cheating on me. There was no other logical explanation. But what should I do next? I couldn't just brush this aside. My mind spiraled through a whirlwind of options. And then I found myself doing something I'm not particularly proud of. I rummaged through her bag and unearthed a safety pin, the kind she always kept handy for wardrobe malfunctions. With meticulous care, I poked holes in the center of each condom before placing them back exactly where I found them. As Emma continued her shower, I grabbed my phone and called my friend Kyle. He's the type of guy who'd do anything for a friend without asking questions. I needed a favor. Nothing too outrageous, just a phone call. I explained that I wanted him to call me in about an hour and pretend there was an emergency back home. Something like a burst pipe at the school that required my immediate attention. Without a moment's hesitation, Kyle agreed, saying he'd call around 7. At that moment, I knew I didn't want to spend the night with Emma anymore. Not after what I had just discovered. The mere thought of being intimate with her made my skin crawl. I figured I could use Kyle's call as a perfect excuse to leave and sort through my thoughts during the drive back home. When Emma finally emerged from the bathroom, I could barely meet her gaze. Every instinct screamed for me to confront her right then and there, to demand answers. But I held back, aware that losing my cool wouldn't do any good. I needed to maintain my composure and strategize my next move. We made our way down to the hotel dining room, and I did my best to act normally, though inside I felt like I was crumbling. Emma seemed utterly oblivious to the turmoil within me. As we sat down at the table, I encouraged her to order whatever she wanted. She shrugged, claiming she wasn't very hungry, and settled on a small filet mignon, suggesting we share a bottle of rose to accompany it. After placing our order, I couldn't resist the urge to test the waters a bit. I casually asked her if she was happy in our marriage. Without missing a beat, she replied that she was. She went on about how we had a lovely home, 2 fantastic kids, and a husband who loved her dearly. She insisted she couldn't ask for anything more. I nodded along, but her words struck me like a punch to the gut. How could she say that while sneaking around behind my back? I found myself confessing that sometimes I wondered if I was doing enough to keep Emma happy. Still, I made a point of expressing how lucky I felt to have her as my wife. I even joked that sometimes I had to pinch myself to believe our life together was real. Emma laughed and called me a silly goose, assuring me that's why I had driven all this way to see her and that I had nothing to worry about because she was happy and content. When our meals arrived, we engaged in light conversation, but my thoughts were miles away. The discovery of those condoms weighed heavily on my mind. Just as we finished our plates, my phone buzzed. It was Kyle, right on cue. I excused myself and stepped into the lobby to take the call, making sure to linger a few extra moments before heading back to the table. Upon my return, I told Emma that Kyle had called about a burst pipe at the school and that I needed to leave right away. Her expression shifted. She looked deflated, though I couldn't tell if she was genuinely upset or simply frustrated that our evening was ending early. Either way, it seemed my departure didn't faze her as much as I'd hoped. No matter what happened, consequences were coming for her. As we headed to the elevator, a man I didn't recognize stepped out, greeting Emma like an old friend. He introduced himself as Oliver Markley and mentioned that he had dropped by her room earlier, but hadn't gotten a response. Extending his hand to me, he said, "Emma talks about you all the time. I'm Oliver." I forced a smile and shook his hand, but faking cordiality was a struggle as we rode up together. The knot in my stomach tightened. This was the guy, wasn't it? The man involved with my wife. Once we reached our room, I turned to Emma and declared firmly that I wanted her to quit her job. I couldn't bear the thought of her continuing to work alongside Oliver. We'd discussed it previously, but now I needed to make it abundantly clear. This was non-negotiable. She fired back immediately, stating that she wouldn't quit, and I needed to get over my paranoia regarding her and Oliver. It felt like she was flipping the narrative, making me the one with the problem. After a quick, chilly kiss, I grabbed my bags and left the hotel, my mind swirling with feelings of anger and betrayal. The entire drive home, I couldn't shake the image of Oliver standing outside Emma's room. By the time I reached the house, I was a bundle of nerves. I hated her for what she was doing, and I despised myself for feeling so powerless to stop it. Divorce consumed my thoughts, yet without concrete proof, I felt utterly defeated. I knew Emma was cheating on me, but I was stuck in a frustrating limbo, unable to take any definitive action. 2 days later, Emma returned from the conference, acting as if everything was perfectly normal. Her cheerful demeanor grated on my nerves, further igniting my fury. While she busied herself unpacking, I couldn't resist the urge to check her bag again. To my dismay, there was one last condom, still sporting the tiny hole I had poked in it. How many had she gone through in just a few days? The thought made my stomach turn. That Saturday, Emma's employer, Liberty Insurance, organized a picnic for employees and their families. The kids were thrilled about the day, but I dreaded it. I had a sinking suspicion that some of her co-workers knew about the affair, and the idea of becoming the target of office gossip or crude jokes made my skin crawl. I might have been paranoid, but given everything I'd been through, I couldn't help it. Emma was in her element, laughing and mingling with her coworkers, including Oliver. They weren't overtly affectionate, but their interaction radiated a level of intimacy that I couldn't ignore. It was as if the rest of the world faded away whenever they spoke. I tried to keep a low profile, hoping to avoid drawing attention to myself. Then, a woman I hadn't met before approached me. "Hi, I'm Hannah Markley." She introduced herself, revealing she was Oliver's wife. She was breathtaking, long auburn hair and piercing blue eyes, the kind of woman who seemed like she had stepped out of a high-fashion magazine. For a brief moment, I felt completely confused. How could Oliver betray someone like her? I had always admired Emma and loved her, but Hannah was an entirely different level of stunning. We exchanged pleasantries, and after some small talk, we decided to find a quieter place to chat. We settled onto a couple of benches by the lake, far enough from the picnic crowd to talk privately. As we sat there, it was clear Hannah had something weighing on her mind. She hesitated, visibly grappling with how to approach the topic. To make it easier for her, I cut to the chase and mentioned that I had discovered the affair just that week. The relief that washed over her was palpable. She confessed that she had known about it for 2 months and had already made the decision to file for divorce. In fact, she had hired a private investigator to gather evidence. Hannah explained that her lawyer suggested asking Emma to testify or at least provide a notarized statement regarding the affair to strengthen her case. When I inquired about the evidence she had, she mentioned photographs and recorded phone conversations, though no videos yet. She was confident that the proof she gathered was more than sufficient to build a solid case. Then she posed a question that caught me off guard. Would I be willing to use some of the same evidence in my own divorce proceedings? She also disclosed that she intended to sue Liberty Insurance for negligence, as she had statements from other employees who were aware of the affair yet did nothing to intervene. Hannah was determined to ensure that both Oliver and Emma faced repercussions. She suggested we collaborate, sharing whatever evidence we had, and I agreed. It seemed sensible to join forces before returning to the picnic. Hannah invited me to her house the next day, explaining that Oliver would be golfing in the morning, which would be an opportune time for us to review everything she had collected. She lived at 26 Hemlock Avenue in Crest, Montana, just a short drive from our current location. We both chuckled a little, knowing that our meeting wasn't exactly a date, but it felt comforting to be in this together. When we returned to the picnic area, it appeared that no one had noticed our absence. I felt a glimmer of hope, as if maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this chaotic mess after all. The next morning unfolded just as I had expected. Emma announced her plans to go shopping, claiming she would be gone for a few hours. As soon as she left the house, I wasted no time dropping the kids off at my mom's place and making my way to Hannah's. When I arrived, she welcomed me at the door, her demeanor calm and collected as she guided me into her den. The room exuded warmth, furnished with a plush leather couch and a computer monitor perched on a table in front of it, currently displaying an empty motel room. Hannah gestured for me to sit down and offered me a drink. I chose a soda, specifically a Pepsi, then asked her what exactly we were about to witness. With a hint of excitement, she informed me that we were about to watch Oliver play a round of golf, live and in full color. Curiosity piqued, I asked how she had set this up. She alluded to a familiar face, the caddy, and casually mentioned that the setup had cost her about $1,400, but she had a feeling Oliver would end up covering that bill one way or another. The session was slated to last a couple of hours, so she encouraged me to get comfortable. She had even prepared popcorn and nachos, promising to send me home with a DVD of the entire event. Hannah admitted that while she wasn't particularly eager to see what was about to happen, she also couldn't resist sticking around for the next 20 minutes. We engaged in small talk as she began to lay out the details of the affair, presenting photos, audio recordings, and documentation that revealed the depth of Emma and Oliver's entanglement. The more she revealed, the clearer it became just how involved they were. It was devastating, yet at the same time, it was the proof I needed. Then, as Hannah had predicted, the monitor flickered to life. There they were, Oliver and Emma stepping into the motel room together. They wasted no time undressing, jumping straight into intimacy without so much as a word of greeting. The video was strikingly clear, although the audio was somewhat distorted. Watching my wife with another man felt surreal and violated. It was one of the most agonizing experiences I had ever encountered. To lighten the atmosphere, Hannah made a comment about how you rarely see a body like Emma's. I managed a strained smile, but internally, I felt lost for words. It was too surreal, and I didn't want to continue watching. After enduring a few more torturous minutes, I couldn't handle it any longer. I turned to Hannah and told her I didn't need to see the rest of the footage. I sensed she wasn't keen on continuing either. Hannah sighed in agreement, admitting that the experience was painful for her as well. We agreed to stop the video, recognizing that the lawyers already had ample evidence. I confided in Hannah that seeing my wife in such a compromising situation, especially with her right beside me, was something I could hardly stomach. Everything about it felt so wrong. Hannah nodded, her understanding evident, and suggested we do something different. I felt a surge of relief when she mentioned showing me her koi ponds in the backyard. That sounded infinitely more appealing than enduring another minute of the video. Her eyes sparkled with excitement at my interest in her hobby, and she seemed genuinely thrilled to share it with me. As we walked outside to the backyard, I couldn't help but reflect on how this afternoon was shaping up to be much more enjoyable for me than for Emma. The koi ponds were nothing short of breathtaking. Hannah had 3 of them, each more impressive than the last. She explained the intricate pumping and filtration systems, and I found myself captivated, especially given my background in plumbing. I offered to lend a hand whenever she needed it, driven by a genuine desire to learn more about the koi ponds. Spending time with Hannah was a bonus, but I wasn't looking for anything romantic, at least not yet. We spent hours outdoors, the time slipping away as we discussed everything except our unfaithful spouses. It was a much-needed distraction. When we finally returned inside, the monitor displayed an empty motel room, signaling that Oliver and Emma had left. It was time for me to head home. Hannah walked me to the door and promised to call when Oliver scheduled his next golf game, suggesting that I bring Megan and Liam over to see the koi ponds. It was a refreshing thought, something positive to look forward to amidst the chaos. During the drive home, I felt a tumult of emotions: relief, anger, and a flicker of hope that maybe I could navigate through this mess after all. The upcoming weeks proved to be challenging. Each time Emma took a shower, I found myself checking her bag, and each time, there was yet another stash of condoms. I couldn't comprehend when she was managing to use them all. It was as if she were leading a double life, one I had no insight into. I kept that safety pin attached to my keychain, ready to poke holes whenever I discovered a new batch. On the days when Oliver had his golf outings, I took the kids to visit Hannah. They adored spending time with the koi lady, as they affectionately called her. They would create colorful drawings of the fish and proudly display them for Emma when we returned home. It was almost comical how oblivious she was, never connecting the dots that Hannah was Oliver's wife. Emma seemed relieved that I could keep the kids entertained while she indulged in her own distractions. I attempted to talk to Emma a few more times about quitting her job and ending things with Oliver, but each conversation ended with the same icy dismissal. The second time was especially brutal. She threw jabs at my masculinity, implying that I was the real issue. Those harsh exchanges only made it easier for me to rationalize everything I was doing. I started crafting excuses to avoid intimacy with her. The less we interacted, the more distant I felt. Then, one evening, Emma dropped a bombshell. She'd been feeling overwhelmed and thought it would be wise to take some time off to visit her sister Laura. She planned to be gone for a few days, maybe even a week. In a feigned display of concern, she pointed out how hard I had been working with all the overtime and late nights. She framed it as an opportunity for me to relax as well, making it sound like her trip was a generous gesture. That night, I hardly slept, my mind racing with everything I needed to plan. The moment to act had finally arrived. The following day, after Emma left for her so-called time away, I sprang into action. I had to come clean to my parents, admitting that I had failed as a husband. They were incredibly supportive, offering their help without hesitation. The kids were ecstatic to stay with their grandparents, and my dad's truck would be perfect for moving Emma's things out of our home. On Thursday morning, I made the 3-hour drive to the clinic where I suspected Emma might go, but I encountered a dead end. That left me with one last option: the family planning center. I entered the building, trying to appear as confident as possible, and told the receptionist I was Ryan Johnson and that my wife, Emma, had sent me to sign some consent forms. Feigning ignorance, I acted like I wasn't quite sure what the specific form was called, but I mentioned it was about understanding the procedure and agreeing not to pursue any legal action. The receptionist nodded and checked her computer, confirming Emma's identity. She informed me that Emma's sister had already signed for her, but my signature would hold more weight. I quickly scrawled my name beneath Laura's. The procedure was scheduled for Friday morning at 11 a.m., with instructions to arrive an hour early. When I asked about any outstanding payments, the receptionist assured me that Emma had already paid the full $800 in cash. I thanked her and left the clinic, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. Everything was in place now. When I arrived at Laura and Mark's home, the atmosphere was predictably tense. Emma looked genuinely surprised to see me, asking what I was doing there. I told her that my parents had offered to take care of the kids for a few days, so I had taken some sick leave and decided to visit them. I casually mentioned that I needed to unwind, just like she did. The room fell silent, and I could almost see the wheels turning in their heads. I had put them in a difficult position, and now they needed to figure out how to respond. Laura exchanged a glance with Mark, and he slipped into the kitchen with her. Emma tried to keep the conversation light, but I could tell she was uneasy. When Mark returned, he suggested we take his buddy Jack's boat out on the lake the following day for some fresh air. I feigned enthusiasm, agreeing that a day on the lake sounded perfect, even though I had zero intention of joining them. The next morning, Jack was already waiting with the boat when I made it clear to Mark that I wasn't going anywhere while he prepared lunch and stocked the cooler with beer. I stood by the passenger door of his truck when he asked if I was getting in. I told him directly that I had changed my mind. I refused to waste the day on a boat with him and Jack. I suggested he make the most of it because he'd have to face Laura when he returned, and I doubted she'd be in a good mood. Mark tried to persuade me to come along, throwing out half-hearted threats and swearing. But after several minutes of back and forth, he realized I wasn't going to budge. Ultimately, he gave up, and he and Jack drove off without me. Once they were out of sight, I headed back into the house, poured myself a cup of coffee, and switched off Emma's cell phone. I called my dad, who was always up early, and we chatted for about 2 hours while I ignored the constant call waiting. It had to be Oliver attempting to reach her. I figured Mark must have warned Laura, but I wasn't about to let that happen. Eventually, Emma and Laura woke up, and I ended my call with my dad, bracing myself for the inevitable confrontation when Laura's phone buzzed back to life. They had only about 5 minutes left before they were supposed to be at the family planning center. I finished off the pot of coffee and brewed a fresh one for the two of them, fully aware that I was about to face some serious backlash. Emma shot me an irritated look and asked what I was still doing there. I replied that I wasn't interested in fishing and thought I'd stick around with them for the day. I suggested we find a nice place for lunch together since I had to leave that night. Emma shot down my suggestion immediately, her voice laced with irritation. She insisted that she and Laura had plans and didn't want me tagging along. "We only see each other a couple of times a year," she said, as if that made her absence acceptable. She reminded me that I had the entire week to spend with her. I refused to let it go. I countered, asserting that since I had driven all this way, the least she could do was spare me half a day. Laura, clearly exasperated, stepped out to make a phone call. Emma sat there, looking utterly defeated, as if I had blindsided her. From the other room, we could hear Laura's voice raised in anger, berating Mark for leaving me behind. Emma attempted one last time to persuade me not to come, arguing that their plans didn't involve me and that I would only be an intrusion. I stood my ground, calmly insisting that I wanted to know what their plans entailed so I could decide if I wanted to join them or find something else to occupy my time. I even joked, asking if they were meeting some guys, to which she quickly denied. Emma explained that their plans included shopping for personal items like bras, underwear, and nightgowns, definitely things they didn't want a man around for. I shrugged and pointed out that most of those stores were in the mall, making it easy for me to entertain myself while they shopped. I even offered to take them out for a nice lunch afterward to compensate for any inconvenience I caused. Laura reappeared in the doorway, glaring at me in silence. Emma must have sensed she was losing this battle because she finally relented, saying she needed to get dressed. About 20 minutes later, the two of them descended the stairs, clearly irritated but resigned to my presence. I had a hunch that Laura's earlier call was to the family planning center, likely to reschedule the appointment. They probably figured they could just wait me out and head to the center after I left. I insisted on driving my own car, making it clear I wasn't going to let them abandon me. When we stopped at a service station, I took my sweet time filling the tank, checking the oil and water, and cleaning the windshield. It was probably the longest I had ever taken for routine car maintenance, and I could see them fuming in the passenger seats. When we finally arrived at the mall, I parked far from the entrance, ensuring we had a long walk ahead of us. Inside, I let them wander off to shop while I kept my distance but remained close enough for them to feel my presence. It was apparent they weren't enjoying themselves. Most of their time was spent whispering to each other, exchanging frustrated glances. They bought a few items, but it felt more like they were going through the motions than genuinely enjoying the experience. I kept an eye on them, but I wasn't interested in their purchases. The key thing was that I had delayed the inevitable. The time for their appointment had passed, and I knew Emma would need to reschedule. While I had no intention of stopping her from going through with it, I took some satisfaction in making it more difficult for her. Around noon, we regrouped in the center court of the mall, just as we had planned. We decided to grab lunch at Olive Garden, and afterward, we headed back to the house. The car ride was thick with tension, punctuated by silence. I could tell both women were furious with me, but I felt a strange sense of empowerment. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was the one in control. Once we returned to the house, I grabbed a beer and settled into the couch, feeling a sense of accomplishment. A few hours later, Mark came back, only to face an intense verbal barrage from Laura that lasted a good half hour. After she had vented, he slipped out again, disappearing until dinner time. Later that evening, after the dishes were cleared, I approached Emma and requested to talk privately in the kitchen. Laura shot me a disdainful look, but held her tongue as she and Emma moved into the living room. Emma was still visibly upset from the day's events, and I knew I was in for a difficult conversation. But I was ready. I wasted no time and confronted her once again, reiterating my demand that she quit her job and cut ties with Oliver Markley. Emma's jaw tightened, as if she were holding back an outburst, and her eyes flashed with anger. She insisted she didn't want to hear it again, that I needed to stop bringing it up. She was fed up with my persistence, reminding me that I already knew her answer wouldn't change. She issued an ultimatum: change the subject or leave. But I wasn't backing down. Instead, I reached into the manila envelope I had brought and pulled out a legal-sized envelope. Inside were the divorce papers. I told Emma that I had asked her at least 10 times over the past 2 months to quit her job and end her affair with Oliver, and each time she had flatly refused. I suggested she sign the papers and mail them in. I even provided a self-addressed, stamped envelope for her convenience. I told her she could have a lawyer review them if she wanted, but I was done waiting for her to make a decision. Emma's face twisted in fury. She leaned across the table, hissing that I couldn't divorce her simply because she refused to quit her job or stop being friends with someone I disliked. She insisted there had to be grounds for divorce, and she was certain I had none. She reminded me that she was my wife and had no intention of giving up her home or family just because I didn't like her work situation. I paused, choosing my words carefully, bracing myself for the storm that was sure to come. Instead, I dug back into my envelope and pulled out a collection of photos. I laid out 6 images on the table, each capturing Emma and Oliver in various compromising positions. I asked her if that was sufficient cause for a divorce. Emma's complexion drained of color, and for a brief moment, she appeared as if she might faint. But rather than displaying any guilt or regret, she erupted into a tirade, demanding I stop placing the photos on the table. She launched a slew of accusations, claiming I was spying on her and hurling every derogatory term imaginable. Words like sneaky and underhanded spilled from her lips, and even worse. She insisted I should have confronted her directly, branding me a pervert who thrived on such sordid discoveries. She said my behavior made her feel sick. Just then, my phone rang. It was my dad, calling to inform me he would be arriving in about 10 minutes with Emma's belongings. After hanging up, I turned back to Emma, who was still seething with rage. She demanded to know who had called, and I replied calmly that my dad was bringing her things to Laura's place. I explained that I had already changed the locks at her house, and if she had forgotten anything, she could let me know, and I would retrieve it for her. She sat there, speechless, as I handed her the title to her car, which I had already signed over. I also presented her with an envelope containing half of our joint bank account funds, around $200. I outlined the visitation rights she would have with the kids. Once a week, with the potential for an overnight stay once a month, but only if she signed a statement admitting to the affair and had it notarized. I then casually mentioned that I possessed a DVD of her and Oliver's little escapade at the Scandier Motel from May 10th. The footage lasted 2 hours and covered everything depicted in the photos. Collecting the pictures from the table, I informed her that I hadn't taken them myself. I wasn't interested in her escapades. What I couldn't stand was the deception. Finally, I pulled out the last item from my envelope, the safety pin I had been carrying around. I slid it across the table toward Emma and explained that I had used it to poke holes in all the condoms she had been using for the past 2 months. I pointed out that she had gone through 48 condoms in just 2 weeks, a quantity I never imagined she would use. Her face flushed crimson as she absorbed my words. She called me a miserable weasel, insisting that what I had done was the most despicable act she'd ever encountered. I remained unshaken. I replied that the real despicable act was her infidelity. I admitted I might be a fool, but she was the one who had shattered our marriage vows. Then I informed her that I had to leave, as my dad was pulling into the driveway. As I stood up to exit, I noted that she hadn't once offered an apology or expressed any remorse for her actions. I bid her farewell, wishing her well with her upcoming procedure, not forgetting to mention that it was on Monday. That was when the tears finally began to flow. As I walked out of the room, Emma broke down in sobs. Laura rushed in to comfort her, while Mark followed me onto the porch. He looked at me, seemingly trying to comprehend what had just transpired, and said I couldn't discard a 14-year marriage over what he deemed a misunderstanding. I challenged him, asking why Emma had come to visit him and Laura if that were true. Mark glanced down at his shoes, clearly grappling with the reality of the situation. After a moment, he mumbled an apology and offered to help unload the truck. We finished unloading in about 10 minutes while Emma continued crying in the kitchen. I didn't care why she was crying. It felt far too little, far too late. The following week, both Emma and Oliver were fired from Liberty Insurance. Emma refused to sign the affidavit that Hannah's lawyer had requested. However, my lawyer assured me that our case was strong enough without it. After that night, I didn't hear a single word from Emma. Not one. She didn't even visit the kids. Strangely, they didn't seem to miss her. They were bonding with Hannah, and we were spending a lot of time together as a family. There was no talk of romance between Hannah and me, at least not yet. We were both focused on navigating our divorces and caring for our kids. Over the ensuing months, I learned more about Coy than I ever imagined possible, and I relished every moment. Finally, after 4 long months, both divorces were finalized. Emma didn't put up a fight, but Oliver went down kicking and screaming. He lost everything, the house, the investments, and soon he was burdened with hefty monthly alimony payments to Hannah, just days before Christmas. Emma appeared at our home bearing gifts for the kids. Wanting to keep the holiday spirit intact, I chose to be polite and didn't let on how I truly felt. She played the part of the devoted mother for about 2 hours before she slipped away, leaving just as quietly as she had arrived. We glossed over the divorce and her affair, almost as if those painful events were mere figments of our imaginations. Yet, after her departure, I found myself enveloped in an odd sense of closure. The house was on the market, and 2 months later, I transitioned to living with Hannah. Meanwhile, Oliver had secured a job in Omaha, taking Emma with him 4 months later. Ultimately, he vanished, leaving Emma in the dark about his whereabouts. Afterward, she moved back in with Laura, who was also navigating her own divorce after Mark accepted a position working on the Alaskan pipeline. Mark had sent Laura the divorce papers through the mail, leaving the 2 sisters to lean on each other, both feeling deserted by the men they had once relied on. On my end, life was flourishing with Hannah. Our relationship felt comfortable, and she genuinely adored my kids, who returned that affection. We treasured every moment together, and by June, wedding plans were well underway. We had both put the trauma of our previous marriages behind us and were looking forward to a bright new beginning. Finally, life had settled into a serene and joyful routine. As for the man Emma had left me for, his luck didn't hold out for long. A few weeks after his disappearance, I heard the news. He had been mugged outside his favorite bar. The attackers had beaten him severely, resulting in 5 broken ribs, shattered kneecaps, and a number of missing teeth. He lost not only his wallet, but also one of his testicles in the brutal attack. It felt like karma had finally caught up with him, putting an end to his carefree cheating lifestyle. Hannah and I continued to strengthen our bond, evolving not just as romantic partners, but as a true family unit. The kids and I were immersed in learning about koi, relishing countless blissful afternoons in the backyard, watching the fish swim gracefully while enjoying the tranquil life we were crafting together. After all we had endured, it finally felt as if we were attaining the life we had always deserved. The days of chaos and deception were behind us, replaced by the simple pleasure of togetherness. One day, Hannah surprised me with the exciting news that she had purchased a stunning 6-bedroom villa nearby, funded by the savings she had tucked away before selling her business. The villa was beautiful, complete with a large swimming pool where we could bask in the sun on scorching summer days. To my delight, Hannah had even preserved my old Chevrolet Corvette, hiding it away in the garage all this time. It was a charming reminder of happier moments, waiting patiently for us to take it for a scenic drive along the coast. That day was on the horizon. We planned to visit a beloved French restaurant where the 3 of us, me, Hannah, and the Chevrolet, could enjoy a peaceful meal together and celebrate our journey thus far. As for Emma, the last I heard, she was still living with Laura, trying to pick up the pieces of her life after Oliver's betrayal. But that was no longer my concern. I had finally moved on, ready to embark on a new chapter with Hannah by my side, and we were both filled with excitement about what the future held.